Okay, I'll give you another minute. Yeah. In fairness to everyone that's waiting.
Brilliant.
I think my voice is echoing through it, so.
Yeah, if everybody could make sure they're muted, that would be fantastic.
Good afternoon, everyone, and can I begin by thanking you for taking time out of your busy schedules to hear about the Year 6 into 7 pilot. Please note that this event is being recorded, and if you're not on mute, could I ask you to mute now, please? So my name's Doreen Cronin, and I've simply been asked to introduce this afternoon's event. So a few thoughts. All of us recognise the importance of transition between key stages, and what stands out is getting it right for the transition between Key Stage 2 and Key Stage 3. For many Year 6 pupil, moving to a large secondary school can be quite a major life experience, which many are ready for, with the opportunity to grow in independence and broaden their horizons, whilst for others, confidence as learners can be reduced, and some fail to progress as expected to begin with. Each secondary school in East Sussex has its own carefully designed programme, which puts the child at the centre of all activities. Having had a successful, happy primary experience, secondary schools work hard to maintain the joy of learning against a background of pupils turning into teenagers and all the angst that this rite of passage brings. Communication between pupils and schools needs to be strong for transition to be successful. And in these COVID times, it's even more important when our current Year 6s have had 2 years of interrupted schooling, SATs cancelled, and lots of landmarks connected with being Year 6 cancelled or curtailed. On top of this, Year 6, as we all know, have not had a chance to visit our secondary schools. So everything they know about their new secondary school is virtual up to now. This makes it even more important that when the pupils arrive from primary school this year, that if possible, they've had a variety of induction activities with their secondary schools. Secondly, and the reason why we're all here today, the pupils need to be well known as a result of the strong communication between the Year 6 teacher and the transition lead, with the data provided by the Year 6 into 7 pilot facilitating a strong conversation about pupil progress and attainment. The county-funded pilot 6 into 7 is just one of the ways that we as a local authority can have a consistent approach to the communication of data in what is hoped to be a less onerous task for our primary schools than filling in lots of different data forms for lots of different secondary schools. One data form used by all secondary schools this year would ensure that all pupils are able to move forward to achieve their potential as a result of the data provided in maths and English of where the child currently sits. It would also mean that there would be less need for rigorous testing in the first few weeks of September, when the pupils should be settling in. We have a couple of speakers today to explain the mechanics of the 6 into 7 pilot, with the aim of persuading primary and secondary colleagues of its benefits, especially as the LEA is already demonstrating a commitment to this by agreeing to fund it for this year. I hope you'll feel that this is a worthwhile data pilot to engage in for the academic year 21 to 22. To be successful, it needs most schools on board, offering us all at a secondary level the opportunity to have a grasp of each child's knowledge and skills, whilst at primary level, It will hopefully reduce the workload and assure you, our primary colleagues, that we are moving your pupils on. I would now like to introduce to you Duncan Baldwin, who's the head teacher of the Castle Rock School, who developed the project in collaboration with ACSCL and who uses it with his local primary schools. In the past, Duncan has been involved in a number of data projects, some of which secondary schools will be aware of. Cyrus, for instance, which encouraged schools to collaborate to get their Progress 8 data quicker, and in the use of transition matrices too. He will describe the SixIntoSeven project from a head teacher's perspective before Sarah Davis from SixIntoSeven gives us an insight into how the system works. Any questions that you have should be placed in the chat, and Bill Roddick will field these later to Duncan or Sarah. So welcome, Duncan, and thank you for being with us today to share your experience of the project. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Doreen. Good afternoon, everyone. Really appreciate this opportunity to sort of share some thoughts about it. Sarah's going to deal with what you really want to know. So I'm just going to say to expand a little bit on what Doreen said there about how I've come to be involved with it, and again just to say how it feels from my point of view now as a head in a secondary school. If you like, sitting on the data that colleagues in my local primary schools have supplied last year, and we're doing it again. So yeah, so some colleagues may know then that my most recent job for this one was at the Association of School and College Leaders, and I spent a lot of time in the job there. Talking to school leaders, teachers, governors, civil servants, Ofsted, ministers, anybody really about data, how it was, and how it was used. And I could say a lot about that. But the one thing that I came to realise, or one of many things I came to realise, one really important thing I came to realise from the point of view of this session was that I felt there was a clear opportunity really for schools to use data better than they do at the moment if they collaborated. So if schools got into the habit of or given a mechanism by which they could share certain types of data, there would be things that could be done that were already done but could be done faster and better, or there would be new things that could be done by virtue of that sort of collaboration. So Doreen mentioned the sort of my first outing into this domain, which was to do with Progress 8. This is back in the heady days when we used to have progress measures, of course. But Progress 8, lots you could say about that, good and bad. One of the bad things was that as a value-added measure, when the results come into the secondary school and the grades come in, you can't actually know how well you've done, if you like. You have to wait for everybody else to work out how well they've done, and then the choice was sort of sitting around for sort of 5 or 6 weeks waiting for the DFE to tell you how well you've done, or given that schools were sitting on the data, ask schools to collaborate. So that's the sort of the first venture that we had there, and those of you who've used CISRA or know about that will know that the system, you know, not waiting for the DFE, can turn all that around now in a normal year anyway, in just a couple of days, just by virtue of schools sharing the data with their provider. Another example of that was crowdsourcing subject level transition matrices. Again, secondary colleagues will know that actually getting to the heart of how individual subjects have performed is actually quite difficult, because you don't get the data soon enough in the year. So again, we came up with a way to crowdsource the information that schools get from the DFE and to build subject level stuff that schools could then use to evaluate their performance subject by subject. So those were good positive examples of where, you know, if schools knew what they were agreeing to share, and they did it in a way that they felt confident with whoever was overseeing it, and they could see a clear purpose for it, then they certainly got involved. So that was affirming for me that you know, the school system, school leaders in the system would want to do this. So as part of that work, we then got to ask ourselves, what other ways are there that that schools could use data if they shared that would let us do new things. And we'd landed on the idea of transition, initially actually to do with modern languages. As you will know, primary schools have a sort of a range of modern languages, not just the languages they actually cover, which vary, but the sort of the scope, the range, and so on. And then in the melee of moving students up to secondary school, I'm sad to say what happens typically is all that prior learning, all that good stuff, often gets lost at best or ignored at worst. And secondary schools basically say, oh, well, let's just start again then, which I think is a terrible indictment. So we were looking at whether we could have some form of standardized approach to capturing what children had learnt and covered in modern foreign languages in year 6 and year 5, so that could be used in a positive way in secondary schools. So we got some funding for that from Esme Fairbairn, all set to go on that we were. And then this is a year ago, and then the pandemic hit, and we were faced, you know, so working for us at the time, our members were faced with receiving children from year 6 into year 7, and actually, at that point, we weren't even sure primary school teachers were going to be able to get back into school. Of course, if you remember when schools were first locked down. So we wanted to try and find a way that we could help with that flow of information. So we had, if you like, an engine ready to go, which was revved up and being fueled on modern languages. We very quickly changed the fuel, I suppose, if you want to call it that, to some elements of maths and English. We worked with some primary schools and secondary schools initially in Greenwich, where we knew where we happened to know, you know, the secondary head and the primary head that fed into that school, and came up with some statements that we felt would be easy enough for primary school colleagues to be able to assess. Some very, very clear, very sort of functional statements across maths and a range of aspects of English. So that, you know, so there was a compromise, if you like, between primary schools who want to say everything about their year 6 pupils, you know, and to give them the sort of the best possible send off on the one hand, and secondary schools who may have to manage, well, in my case, 250 year 6, new year 7 pupils, and having information that's actually manageable in a format that's useful. All the while mindful of workload, especially under the circumstances that we were under last year, and we are under again this year, basically. So we set it up last year, and I think we had 1,000 schools that took part last year. So it's a sort of a proven concept. It was you know, lots of schools used it. So then moving from, and this is basically the last bit of my story, I'll shut up and Sarah will get on with the business end. But moving into the headship at Castle Rock School, and then sort of switching the 6 into 7 on, it was a real joy actually to see that the schools, you know, my partner primary schools where I am, virtually all of the schools in the town had taken part in this activity, and between the two schools, the two secondary schools, both in our trust actually, we'd actually captured by the good grace of the primary school colleagues there a huge amount of really useful information, and that information is still highly relevant. I mean, we've obviously, you know, this year has been constantly disrupted, isn't it? My year 7s, current year 7s have been, you know, as a bubble, have been the bubble's been sort of sent home. I think on 3 occasions, the year 7's been closed, the bubble's been closed, and of course we've had a subsequent lockdown. The 6 into 7 data that exists for those pupils is actually the most complete and still the most useful set of data that we've actually got. So it was a great for me as the incoming head of the school to know that primary schools had supported it so much, so well, and very useful to have that information. And we're still using it, if you like, even though it was we're using it basically to think about the curriculum, how we actually manage Year 7, how we manage their learning, having had lockdown again, and what we might need to catch up and recap and so on. So that's basically it. Just want to, I suppose the last thing to say is that we're very excited. So we're certainly going to do it. I'm really pleased that my new buddies in Leicestershire are all going to do it. So all secondary schools in Leicestershire and all primary schools are taking part in this, and the local authorities again, sort of overseeing that and covering the costs of that, which is great. So I'm really pleased that it's sort of caught on there, as it has in various pockets. So it'd be great if East Sussex could too, particularly as East Sussex. I forgot to say this. East Sussex is my old stomping ground, and spent many happy years there working in St Leonard's on Sea at Filsham Valley, as was. Yeah, so that's good. So it's great to see Bill, who I knew from working there. And many of you too. Right, so that's the story, and I'll hand over to Sarah to sort of pick up actually how it works and what it looks like, what's involved. Is that okay? And obviously I'm very happy to answer any questions from colleagues later on, if you have any. Okay, I'll go on mute.
Thank you, Duncan. That's brilliant, and hopefully that's given you all an insight into where this came from, who was involved in developing it, and also thank you, Doreen, for that great introduction and for setting the scene there. I'm going to do the dreaded visuals and screen sharing now, so I apologise in advance for the death by PowerPoint, but it really is genuinely is the easiest way to talk you through it. So just to very quickly recap, I'm Sarah, and I work for Ask Eddie. I run the sales and marketing there, and we're the tech team behind this project. So we've built SixIntoSeven, but really the concept and the idea came from the work that Ask School have done alongside school leaders, and this was under the banner of a thing we were calling the Open Data Project for Schools, which some of you might have seen on branding, and this is very much the space where we brought school leaders together to talk about collaboration and the kinds of ways that they can use their data smarter. As Duncan said, we ran this last year. We worked with lots of schools up and down the country on the pilot for this, as is, to really develop a way of primaries and secondaries working together to make sure that group of Year 6 children, which had a really tricky few months with lockdown and the pandemic, as they moved into Year 7. We weren't necessarily planning to do this in this form again this year, because the government said that SATs would definitely happen. But in January, that wasn't going to be the case. So we regrouped, and then we looked at how SixIntoSeven could support schools again this year. So the context here is that we know that schools already have existing transition processes, conveying pupil information back and forth. There is a gap from the removal of SATs, whether or not you think SATs is the most appropriate measure, but there's a gap in attainment data there for pupils to make sure that progress through their primary career is being captured and communicated. So as I said, we put SixIntoSeven together, and as Duncan alluded to, it was based on a framework we'd been looking at for modern foreign languages, and the idea was to facilitate a conversation about pupil attainment. So it wasn't to replace those conversations that primaries and secondaries have about pupils, but really about establishing a baseline with a set of criteria that was common across all schools that were participating. Using the data in that way lets the primaries assess their children, each pupil on a level playing field, taking into account primary progress as a whole, rather than assessing them at some point in the spring term and it being a marker of where they were then. But equally, it lets the secondaries sort of look at each child on a level playing field as well, with a consistent set of data. We built the platform last year and have again this year with GDPR in mind. So it's entirely data compliant. Everything that goes into the portal is covered by the data sharing agreements that you guys will accept when you sign up. And the terms and conditions have that information in mind. The data being passed from a primary to a secondary is the absolute minimum that is relevant and useful to the secondary. There's not pupil information being put into a central system and being sent around willy-nilly. So you'll see a few quotes here and there from the pilots last year. They've pulled out the key messages really about how secondary teaching, picking up from where primary left off, is instilling confidence. So Doreen referred to this right at the beginning, that it is about the pupils. They're not just numbers, they're not just data. This is about ensuring that that individual pupil has enough information behind them to give them a really great start as they join secondary. So just to introduce the platform, it's really straightforward, it's very intuitive. We took the feedback that schools gave us from the pilot about a few of the areas that they struggle to understand, and we've rebuilt it with user experience in mind. So using it as schools, you'll be able to navigate through and understand what you expect to do each step. And you can, because it's a cloud-based portal. This isn't about reinventing the wheel. It's very much about bringing it all together into one place. And the key here is that this isn't about accountability. Obviously, there is some level of accountability because information about pupils are going in, but it's not about an assessment to be held against the primary school. This is very much an honest assessment of where the pupil is, so that the secondary can help support them. From a primary point of view, the primaries get a dashboard to input a set of professional judgments, which is what the portal is built around. The action for the primary is to upload a list of pupil names with their UPN. That's the only personal data that goes into the system. And the UPN is what the system uses to match the pupils up with their destination secondary school. The primary teachers, the Year 6 teachers, will assess each child according to whether they're secure or not secure in the range of competencies, which I'll show you in a minute. There's an opportunity also to flag any pupil with high attainment throughout that subject. Primaries only do this once, no matter how many secondaries they feed into, so they go through the whole list all in one go. They don't have to do it all in one go, they can do it in a few goes, but they have one dashboard for all that information, and the system goes ahead and matches up the pupils so that the primaries aren't filling in spreadsheets from multiple secondary schools all at the same time. There's also an opportunity for a primary to add a flag, as we're calling it, which is really an alert for the secondaries to say there's something else that we want to tell you about this pupil. So that's where the dialogue and the communication comes in, that if the secondary is prepared to know that there's something to be talked about for that child, they can open up that dialogue. It might be something negative, but equally it might be something positive, and we thought it was important to keep that element within the portal to facilitate those conversations. From a secondary point of view, your dashboard looks exactly the same, it's just bigger because you've got more pupils. So you upload your list of incoming Year 7s alongside their UPN, and the system goes ahead and brings that information in from the primary schools. There's a really important connection phase that the secondaries do, where they nominate the primaries that they want to connect to, and the primaries have to accept that connection. The reason we do that is it's for data sharing purposes, it's for data protection, so that only the secondary that's receiving that pupil can receive the information. The secondary can review the data and any of the flags, and then go ahead and contact the primary for any additional information. It's a dynamic dashboard, so as soon as the primaries publish the pupil information, it comes into your secondary dashboard. This is the list of professional judgments. So as Duncan said, this is designed by primary and secondary school leaders and subject leads. It's not something that I Ask Eddie have come up with. This was given to us by the steering group, and it represents, exactly as Duncan said, the minimum really of what the primaries wanted to tell the secondaries and what the secondaries wanted to hear. The reason I say minimum is because there were lots of different variations of that. So this was bringing that together to establish a common baseline. It's focused on the end of Key Stage 2 expectations, but it's not in the language of the national curriculum, because this isn't a formal assessment process. This is the teacher's opinion. It's their best judgment on how the pupil has progressed attainment-wise. Having information in this way, as Duncan said, it gives the Year 7 teachers and the head of year, as they join the secondary, to use for form planning, to have a look at who they want in what set, and to prepare for any potential issues. It gives a little bit of breathing space at the start of September, because secondaries will have this information as soon as the primaries enter it in May, June and July. So they'll have a bit of a head start to start thinking about who they're expecting. There is an opportunity to add and remove pupils afterwards. So we know that there's a certain amount of mobility after admissions close. So it is possible to re-update your list once you know who your final cohort is. And that's really it in terms of standard 6 into 7. It's really very much about plugging that gap left by SATs, but also thinking about a new way of communicating between primary and secondary, and really seeing those pupils as individuals with their own baseline to help build from at secondary level. This isn't the remit, but I think it's useful for you guys to be aware that actually internally we're having lots of conversations about where else can we take transition. So and I won't talk about this for ages because I'm not doing a hard sell, but certainly if you guys invest in this process and get the hang of it and like the way it works, we're working with a couple of pilot groups that they're actually London boroughs, to develop an extension to the portal where all of the other bits of information that schools pass back and forth for transition can be captured in a very similar way. So the system does all the matching, lots of the information can come direct from the MIS, but it's all very much wrapped up in data sharing and GDPR in a way that existing spreadsheets and sending information back and forth isn't necessarily. So that's the extension. From a communication and a setup point of view, we've got lots and lots of resources, we've got support, we've got live chat to help everybody get started, and various leaflets and flyers to tell you more, and obviously anyone who wants any more information can drop me a line, but we're open to questions at the end. The first thing people usually ask is what's the timescales? So I'll answer that ahead of being asked it. The portal's live, it's up and running, it's ready for you to join. I know that lots of you are aware of this and are on my mailing list because you've been asking me questions and dropping me a line to say you're excited about it. So that's really great to see. And yeah, as soon as you're ready, you can go ahead and get started. We don't impose deadlines on the system, so it's very much about how your specific group of schools want to work. We suggest that primaries do their input probably in May, middle of May, when they'd normally be thinking about SATs, and publish that data middle of June for secondaries to start using it. But as I say, it's very much up to how your schools want to communicate and work together as to how you build that. And that's it. So please do ask questions. I'm very happy to field any thoughts or feedback you've got.
Thank you, Sarah. That's really useful. Thank you, Duncan, as well. Colleagues, if you have questions, they can go into the chat, or if you want to raise your hand and ask a question, that's also fine.
The stunned silence. We don't normally get this. Maybe Duncan and I have just got really good at answering those questions ahead of time.
So while people are possibly forming their questions, can I just say two things that I've been asked? Is that all right, Bill?
Yes, please, Duncan. Yeah.
Sorry. So when it comes to the statements, so Sarah's shown you, the list of statements. Clearly that list could have been enormous. If it was to cover off everything that children do at Key Stage 2, couldn't be enormous because, of course, we needed it to be manageable. So if we take one of the steps, so I betray my roots here as a maths teacher by trade, but one of the statements basically says, do they know their tables? Effectively up to 12 times 12. What it doesn't say, or there isn't one that says can work out the area of a triangle, which I know is something that's taught at Key Stage 2. So as an ex-maths teacher here, and possibly a current maths teacher if the timetable has his way, unfortunately for my kids, you know, one of the things that if you're taking children into year 7, you can actually teach them how to find the area of a triangle quite quickly. What you can't do is teach them about multiplication. You know, it takes a long time, as you know, to get those sort of core concepts of multiplication embedded. So for the sake of trying to find just the really hard core of stuff that you really want to know, that's a good example of the sort of dialogue that those colleagues in Greenwich, and then actually there was a second iteration of that with the Teaching School Alliance up in Yorkshire. You know, if we were doing that from scratch, if we were doing that for an East Sussex version, you'd probably come up with a slightly different list. You know, would you come up with a similar list? Probably you would. You know, so you know, there'd be some variations on that, but it's not a bad list really. It's been around the houses, and it's gone through the loop again this year. So you know, I can tell you hand on heart that list of information as a head is very useful to get us going with our new intake, basically. Okay,
Thanks,
people have warmed up here. That's good. Right.
The questions are rolling in, so I'll take it from the top.
Okay.
What information or advice is provided to the primary schools on assessment criteria to decide on secure, not secure, high attainment?
Should I take that one?
Yeah, I mean, Duncan can add more information on that, but there's a guide within the system, and there's a downloadable PDF to say sort of the how to do it, but certainly the why and the considering it is something that Duncan explains really well.
So when it comes to all of those judgments, as we've said thus far, what we're doing here is this is not sort of standardized assessment or you know, or SATs type stuff. This is asking a professional, a year 6 classroom teacher who's worked with those children, you know, well, all year or whatever configuration of the year they've worked with, you know, every day. They've spoken to those students about their times tables or aspects of the punctuation or whatever it is. They know, based on their professional experience, we believe, I firmly believe, that they can tell if a student's really where they should be, where you'd expect an 11-year-old to be. That's as you know, detailed as we get it, if you like. I mean, I can see, you know, all I can tell you is that obviously I've got data from I think it's 11 primary schools have completed it where I am, and talking through with my heads of English and maths, you know, they definitely don't say, oh well, you know, these 2s from this primary school should really be 3s or 1s. You know, they're definitely not telling me that. I think that's a sort of a judgment that we can definitely trust primary school teachers to do. It's supposed to be, and bearing in mind it was created so that you could do it really without reference to anything. It's what you feel in your, you know, feel in your gut feeling, visceral really, rather than standardized.
Brilliant, thank you, Duncan. There was a question about where people go to register for this. Colleagues, we have asked the secondary schools to let us know if they're participating, and secondary schools will be informing Kerry Bennett if they are interested in doing that. Obviously, there may be conversations that need to happen between the primary and secondary schools about that. That links to the next question, which is, are primaries reliant on the secondary schools to set the system up and connect with primaries? Sarah, do you want to take that one?
Yes, so I've been stealthily commenting in the chat. You can tell that I'm a millennial because I just type away. So yes, you're absolutely right. This is a school-led system. So me at Ask Eddie, Duncan as a head teacher, we can't force anybody to participate. But the system is set up to encourage that dialogue and facilitate it as much as we can. So when a secondary registers the portal and goes in, they send a connection request through the portal to the primary school using the head teacher's email address, and that's the invitation. So as long as your primaries know that they're looking out for that, the system is doing that for you. But in terms of questions about whether the secondary will value this information, why the primary being asked for it, it is really important that secondaries feel that, because that imbues that trust with the primary and the secondary to make this a worthwhile endeavour. Hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you. The next question is there a reason that for not having attitudes to learning as
Yeah, again, this is probably a good one for Duncan to pick up in terms of the where we got to with this. Certainly from the steering group point of view, it was felt that actually using the language of primary assessment in that way would be a bit confusing. But I know, Duncan, there were specific decisions and feedback made around that.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's what the portal looks like at the moment, and you know, we've explained that it was created hurriedly last year, if you like, and it's been this year we've had more time to sort of tell people about it, you know, like this, and to try hopefully to encourage people that this is a good way of doing it. So having described how I think you can be pretty confident about a teacher saying that whether they know their tables or not, you know, I would go to the wall to defend and trust Year 6 teachers' opinions about that. Attitudes to learning is a bit more difficult to pin down, but as part of the discussions we've had with some groups, you know, if we look ahead, you know, assuming this catches on, and I really hope it does, it's certainly caught on in some places. There is absolutely no reason why a group such as East Sussex or Leicestershire or, you know, whoever can configure what they want to capture. You know, we don't need to stick with English and maths necessarily next year. We've got MFL, I hope, as we're piloting, as I've explained. You could consider some of the other subjects, and you certainly could consider some of those other bits of information as well. Some of the harder pupil characteristics, sort of harder data, you know, it is possible to move that. Sarah's already explained that that's underway in a London borough, where they're using this portal to do all of their transition, if you like. So that's the reason we haven't got attitudes to learning at the moment. But there is absolutely no reason why, if you agreed as a set of schools, a group of leaders in East Sussex or with others, not that you couldn't have that. So yeah, so not yet. But maybe, you know, if you really wanted it, if you got stuck into this as a way of doing it. I'm scrolling down. I'm on a roll here, Bill. So can I do the download as a secondary? Is that all right? It's fantastic. I have to say it is fantastic. The portal is a dream to use. So I set it up for this year. It took me 15 minutes. My data manager, who treats me in this way, sadly, said if you let me do it, it would have been done in 5 minutes. But there we are. So it really is a doddle to set up. And when you get this data down, click on download, it just drops out as a CSV, and you see you see the numbers. So you get a 2 for a child that's secure. You see a 3 where they're sort of above expectations, if you like, for the whole subject. The 3 only applies for all of maths or all of reading, not for individual bits and pieces. But honestly, you know, you can get that, and you can import that to MIS or send it out to your subject leaders or whatever you want to do with it. We've got it in our MIS now, for example.
Brilliant. Thanks, Duncan. Another question: is there an option for attendance information to be included?
Yes. So the exciting thing about this, and that's what I was alluding to in the talk of the extension. The work that we're doing with pilot boroughs is very much to bring in pretty much anything that you might want to transmit as part of transition. We've set up so that the primary's MIS plugs into the system, so a lot of the fields that already exist in data come in, again with absolute mindfulness that it has to be relevant and useful. We're developing that, as I said, with a couple of boroughs in London this year. There's an opportunity for other boroughs to jump in and use it if they absolutely want to. The challenge for us is that it does take a few weeks to a month to develop those bespoke systems for boroughs. So it might be a little bit late on for you guys to pull all of that together this year, but absolutely next year that the sky's the limit.
Attendance, interesting one actually. So our first outing, if you like, and trying to get schools to work together was all based around attendance, and we found out some absolutely fascinating things. This is the sort of open data project more generally, including particular types of days when students did and didn't attend, or attended less often on certain days. You know, we worked with some schools in the Northwest on this one. And there's a story of a couple of years ago in the Tears about Christmas Jumper Day, which was based on the work that we did there, and about how Christmas Jumper Day is not a good idea, actually. Anyway, more of that possibly another time.
Thanks, Duncan. In terms of the statements, how do they work with SEND pupils, or is this just where pupils would be flagged?
Yeah. So, do you want to pick that up, or should I?
Yeah, absolutely. It's an interesting question that we have been asked, and the answer actually for each group that I speak to is different, and it depends very much on the type of SEND that we're talking about. So if it's a pupil going into a state school or a mainstream school, I should say, where the primary believes that it will be useful to have that the information with the other pupils, then absolutely record it. Again, the extension concept does allow for specific criteria for special schools to be included. So certainly it's very much the school's judgment this year in the professional judgment system about whether or not it would be useful to have that.
Super.
I'm answering lots of questions from Charlie. Charlie is all over the professional judgment, so I'll pick up a few of these so I can explain it to them. So in terms of the download, which Duncan explained, it's a really simple CSV. The numbers come through as not secure is a number 1, and secure is a number 2. If you want to, you can go ahead and add them up for an overall score, but we wouldn't necessarily encourage that. If all within each section, so for speaking and listening, if they meet all of the criteria as secure, there's an optional high attainment, which is a 3. So again, I suppose for each people, you could add up the number of 3s they've got. It's more to do with the marking than it is the total score, if that makes sense. So it's not built as a score. I can see Duncan nodding. It's not a scoring system as such, but once you've got the data, I guess you can use it in that way if it would be useful.
Great, thanks, Sarah. There's a question. Sorry, Duncan, did you have something to add?
No, I've just gone down to the cost of schools. We do need to tackle that.
Okay, yeah, we'll get to that one. That's easy for this year. Did the pilot primary schools, find that the process and information was useful for them? So primary schools, the benefits. Who wants to take that one, Sarah?
Yeah. So Duncan actually can explain a bit more on this, because he's now in daily contact with some of the primaries. I've pasted in the chat a case study which I wrote up an interview with one of the feeder primaries who took part last year, and I'm very much that the themes they were coming out with was how useful it was to be able to do it all in one place, how much time it saved not having to do different information in different places for different schools, and really just the reassurance that something was going from primary to secondary in a pandemic year, certainly to help the secondaries prepare. But Duncan, it's Natalie's case study that I've linked everyone to. I don't know if you've got some more feedback from your primaries.
No, I mean there's the possibility of one very tangible benefit for primaries. So clearly we're relying on primary schools to do the grafting here by definition, aren't we? But I think we've certainly spoken about whether you could then turn that out into a report. which you could then issue to say, you know, our end of term report is this. I don't know if that's happened or if that's in the sort of the pipeline development wise, but I would have thought, knowing how excellent Ask Eddie are, I don't know whether it's available this year, but you could easily see that turning into a report. I mean, we don't want to turn this into something that it's not. You know, it's not a Sims, it's not a something like that. But I think once you've put that information in, you know, on the principle of, you know, enter a piece of information once, use and reuse, you could easily see that you could create a pupil level report. And in particular, then, if you then went on to talk about those sort of behaviours for learning type of things, you could definitely see how that would supplement it as well.
Brilliant.
There's actually a final little interesting nugget on that is we're working again development wise on a primary pupil page. So this is very much about primaries taking that information back out again and having a sheet with the pupil and the list of judgments next to them, and using that internally for parent reports or reviews or checking internal progress. So what we're really keen on this year and for future years is very much about that information being useful at all levels. So it's not just primaries inputting it and it goes away to the secondaries and they never get to see it again. Future iterations of this concept is you know, really interesting ideas that schools have been coming back to us with about at the end of year 7 primaries getting a bit of a data feedback about whether their pupils did achieve what they were hoping they could, and even the destinations data when they get to GCSE, actually that coming back to primary. So there's lots of things that we're really excited to be able to include in future years, and certainly bringing the information back down again as well as it going up is one of the things we're considering.
Brilliant, thanks, Sarah. I'll just pick up on the question about cost to schools. The normal cost is £500 per secondary school. The secondary school pays and then just invites the primary schools. But for this year, the local authority is completely funding it, so there is no cost to schools for this year. I'm just scanning. Colleagues, if I miss your question, and we get to the end of the session, please feel free to get in contact with us to get any clarification that you need.
So Bill, there's a question from Charlie again about how do you define highly secure in specific skills? We're not. We wondered about that. You know, in tables, is a child, you know, are they a high attainer in that? In the end, we decided not to do that. We are simply saying that they're a high attainer in maths or in reading. You know, they're a higher attainer than you would expect an 11-year-old to be, you know, so we don't go as far as saying they're a higher attainer in aspects of reading, aspects of writing, or aspects of mathematics overall, and that's based on the feedback from the schools that were engaging with this. They felt that you couldn't, it wasn't really doable, and it wasn't really useful in any case. You probably just want to sense that a child is more able, you know, a higher retainer than an 11-year-old typically would be. So that isn't there. I hope that's answered Charlie's question. Okay, good, thank you. And the cost to primary schools is free in any year, by the way, because the primary schools are doing the work, if you like, and the secondary school is the consumer. It wouldn't be right to charge primary schools for that. I'm saying that, Sarah. So I think that's still the plan.
It is true. For the extension version we're doing, because there's we'd have to plug in through an intermediary in future year that there might be a little bit of a cost, but yeah, certainly this year to use it it's all wrapped up in what we've already agreed.
Fantastic. Now, are there any colleagues present in the meeting who still feel that they haven't had their question answered? Because if so, could you put your hand up and we'll give you a chance to ask the question, and we have got 10 minutes left if we need it, and I want to make sure that everyone feels like they know as much as they need to know about the system before we finish.
The Lorraine's question about pre-populating, I think the answer is no. I think that what you see is blank. But I can say that we work with the primary school teachers in Greenwich and in Yorkshire, and this isn't an onerous activity at all. It's designed to be not onerous. You complete a child's rows of data once you got into the swing of it in a minute or two. You're looking at an hour and a half probably for a complete year 6 class, and bearing in mind that you only do that once. So secondary schools are highly annoying, aren't they, in that they ask you for some things, and then the secondary school just down the road asks you for similar but annoyingly different stuff. Why, really? I mean, why? I don't know why we haven't done this before, to be honest. This is one of the things that a pandemic is actually jolting us into doing things differently, potentially, like parents' evenings. Why didn't we do that? Why haven't we ever codified transition? So in terms of reducing workload, it's very focused on getting workload in primary schools as low as possible. They just do it once, and all schools just receive that. There's no constructing spreadsheets. There's no, the horrendous stories you hear about, dozens and hundreds of spreadsheets being sent all over the place. You just do it once, and the portal does the matching as a database system brilliantly. Absolutely brilliant.
Fantastic. Thanks, Duncan. We have got no hands up in the list. Oh, yes, we have. We do have a hand up. N. Townsend Smith.
Hello, I've just put a comment in there regarding the extension. Is there no capacity or scope for Sussex to actually have the extension? Because my concerns would be right now for the quality of data we currently capture during our transition progress, I would still be requesting our primaries to give me further information. I think this concept is absolutely fantastic. I just think for us as a school, we'd be missing some of the quality information we currently retrieve, in a very sort of happy working relationship with our primary. So if there is scope to have the extension, I think that would benefit a lot of our schools that have worked hard over the last 10 years to develop our transition data capture.
Sarah?
Yeah, so from my point of view, the only challenge really is money, because we have to develop the thing, but also time. Just in conversations, we know that you guys want to get cracking on this. Certainly the secondaries, if it's well-being or pastoral or SEND information, the secondaries usually would have that almost as soon as admissions close. By all means, lobby Bill and get yourselves onto a borough-wide transition extension portal. I'm not going to stand in your way, but it's quite a lot of build and quite a lot of resource to add those extra elements in. I probably oversimplified it. It's not just sort of chucking forms in. There's quite a lot of data sharing in the background to set it all up. So it's not impossible. I don't say anything is impossible in these terms, but it would be a journey, I think, that your schools would all need to run along with.
So Sarah, just taking that answer on, it looks like for this year, no, but that we could work together as local authority in terms of developing for next year.
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah.
The exciting thing really is as I explained, the principle is exactly the same. So once your schools are registered, once they're connected, you've already done a lot of the legwork this year, and then all we do next year, well, not all we do, but what we do next year is the extra fields and the additional information and making sure that you are all covered for data sharing and GDPR compliance.
Brilliant, thanks, Sarah. There is another question from Eric.
Yeah, hi there. Sorry, I probably missed this, but you've got the two options here of secure or not secure. And obviously, if an individual student is secure in a number of areas, correct me if I'm wrong, they may get a 3. Is there something as well which is at the other end of the spectrum? Because you could have quite a few students who are not secure, but there's a huge kind of difference between the levels of abilities as well.
Yeah, I think again that's where you'd want to use the flag. So you'd flag against them, and there's an opportunity as well for a 0, which is a not recorded. So for pupils where they haven't been with you long enough to make that judgment, or they've been absent for a long period in the term, you can say, I haven't been able to make that judgment. But certainly if they were way under where you would expect them to be, that's where the flag and the discussion would come in. which hopefully would be fairly usual for you guys to be having that conversation about a struggling pupil anyway.
Okay, thank you.
Brilliant. Okay, we're right at the end of the meeting time, and I don't think there are any more questions. Just double checking. Sorry, there's something in the way. Okay, so there's a comment about having conversations with primaries. This is obviously from secondary, having conversations with primaries to gather more personal information and to keep those relationships going between the schools, but love the system for the consistency of data. I don't think there are any more hands up. So at this point, I will thank everybody that's been involved this evening. Thank you, Duncan, for making time. Duncan's on holiday in his area of the country at present, so thank you for giving up some of that. Thank you to Sarah for answering so many questions, and thank you for Doreen for kicking the whole event off so well, and thank you for everybody who came along, giving up your time and asking some great questions. You know, if you think of any more, please let us know. We're quite happy to keep answering your questions for you. Have a very pleasant evening, and goodbye.
Thank you.